Hi everyone, and welcome back to Unexplained Encounters channel. In today's video, we're diving into a chilling true story of past life regression that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Whether you're winding down, working, or tackling some chores, let this eerie tale pull you into a world where the past refuses to stay buried. If you enjoy the story, please give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling updates. Let's get started. I've lived with the pain for as long as I can remember. It wasn't the kind of pain that would kill you, but the kind that slowly wears you down, day by day, making each step feel like walking on broken glass. Doctors had no answers, just shrugs, prescriptions, and the same old line, "It's just something you have to live with." And so I did. I adapted to a life filled with physical therapy sessions, medications, and a relentless ache that flared up whenever it wanted, often leaving me immobilized and frustrated. I was 30, living alone in a creaky old apartment in Boston, where every wooden floorboard squeaked under the slightest weight, and the dim lighting seemed to whisper secrets in the dark. I tried to keep a social life, despite the constant pain. My best friend, Jenny, was my lifeline, a cheerful, vibrant woman whose laugh could light up a room. But lately, she had changed. The vibrant light in her eyes had dulled, replaced by a haunted, faraway look. I knew something was terribly wrong, but every time I asked, she brushed it off. Until that one afternoon at a Starbucks downtown. We were sitting by the window, the rain tapping softly against the glass. Jenny stared at her untouched latte, her fingers trembling as she traced the rim of her cup. The lively chatter of other customers faded into a dull hum around us, creating an unnerving silence between us. "You okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Jenny glanced up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a sadness I couldn't place. I went to see a past life regression therapist," she said quietly. I was taken aback. I'd heard of past life regression but had always dismissed it as pseudoscience, something for people who read too many New Age books. But there was something in Jenny's voice that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. She wasn't joking, and she definitely wasn't okay. "What happened?" I pressed gently. "You okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Jenny glanced up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a sadness I couldn't place. I went to see a past life regression therapist," she said quietly. I was taken aback. I'd heard of past life regression but had always dismissed it as pseudoscience, something for people who read too many New Age books. But there was something in Jenny's voice that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. She wasn't joking, and she definitely wasn't okay. "What happened?" I pressed gently. Jenny hesitated before she began to speak, her voice cracking under the weight of the memories. She told me about the regression session and how she had seen herself as a little girl in a rural Asian village, surrounded by mud brick houses and fields. In this vision, she was hiding under a bed, paralyzed with fear as her family desperately tried to shield her from something horrific. She watched through the slats as Japanese soldiers burst into the house, swords gleaming, faces devoid of mercy. The soldiers didn't hesitate. They slaughtered her parents, grandparents, everyone who had been shielding her. Blood splattered across the floor, mixing with the dirt, and the girl's tiny fingers gripped the wooden bed frame so tightly they turned white. But the soldiers found her. They dragged her out and did unspeakable things. Jenny's voice broke as she described the soldiers' brutality, her own screams, and the suffocating helplessness of watching it all unfold. By the time she finished, Jenny was shaking, tears streaming down her face. "I could feel everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It wasn't just a vision. It was real." I didn't know what to say. It felt like something out of a horror movie, but I could see the raw terror in Jenny's eyes. Whatever she had experienced in that session had changed her, and not for the better. "You need to see the therapist again," I suggested, trying to sound reassuring. "Maybe she can help you make sense of it, find some closure." Jenny nodded, though she didn't look convinced. I couldn't get the images she'd described out of my head. I wanted to understand. I wanted to know if past life trauma could explain my own inexplicable pain. So, I made an appointment with the same therapist. The therapist's office was located in a quiet, old building on a narrow street in downtown Boston. The place had an eerie charm. Dusty bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient-looking texts about hypnosis, past lives, and the occult. The dim lighting and the faint smell of incense added to the unsettling atmosphere. It felt like stepping into a different time, a place where reality and the supernatural blurred. The therapist, Dr. Lang, was a tall, thin man in his 50s with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. He spoke with a calm, measured tone that was somehow both comforting and deeply unnerving. He explained that past life regression was a way to uncover hidden traumas that could affect our current lives, often manifesting as physical or emotional pain. Jenny went in first. I watched as Dr. Lang guided her into a state of deep relaxation, his voice soft and hypnotic. Jenny's expression slowly shifted from tense to something far more distressing. Tears rolled down her cheeks as Dr. Lang gently coaxed her through the process, helping her confront the horrors she had seen in her previous session. It was like watching someone relive a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. When it was finally my turn, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Dr. Lang guided me to a reclining chair, and I lay back, staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of an old clock and the soft rustle of pages turning somewhere nearby. I closed my eyes and let his voice guide me into a trance, my consciousness drifting like a leaf on a dark river. At first, there was nothing but darkness, a vast, empty void. But soon, shapes began to form, blurry and indistinct at first, then sharpening into vivid images. I found myself standing on a foggy pier, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks echoing around me. The air was cold and damp, the kind that seeps into your bones. I looked down at my hands and realized I was no longer myself. I was a man, dressed in old, worn clothes. The pier stretched out into the murky water, and the fog was so thick I could barely see my own feet. There was a weight in my pocket, a letter, crumpled and worn, with an address scrawled hastily on the front. I was supposed to deliver it. I remembered the face of the man who had given it to me, a close friend, someone I trusted. He had begged me to take the letter to his family, to let them know he was okay. But I hadn't. Life got in the way, and the letter remained undelivered, forgotten in my coat pocket. Then came the news: my friend had died in a shipwreck, his body lost to the sea. The guilt of my broken promise weighed heavily on me, but it was too late. As I stood on the pier, the fog began to thicken, and I saw him. My friend, drenched and pale, standing at the end of the dock. His eyes were dark, empty, filled with a sorrow so deep it pierced my soul. He didn't speak, but his gaze said it all: "You failed me." I tried to move, to speak, but my body was paralyzed. I was trapped in that moment, reliving my failure, my broken promise. The guilt wrapped around me like a vice, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was spinning, and I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of what I had seen. Dr. Lang's voice pulled me back to reality. He was calm, collected, but his eyes betrayed a hint of concern. "You've carried this guilt for a long time," he said. "It's manifested as physical pain, a reminder of the promise you broke." I left the office feeling disoriented, like a piece of me had been torn open. That night, the nightmares began. I dreamed of the pier, of my friend's lifeless eyes staring at me. I heard his voice calling my name, accusing me, and every time I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, my legs throbbing with pain. Over the next few days, things started to get worse. My apartment, once a sanctuary, became a place of dread. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker. The floorboards creaked more frequently, even when no one was walking on them. I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, flickers of black that disappeared the moment I turned my head. The nightmares continued, each one more vivid and terrifying than the last. I found myself back on that foggy pier every night, always staring at the ghost of my friend. But now, the dream would change. The pier would start to rot and sink, dragging me down with it, while my friend's outstretched hand reached for me, fingers twisted and skeletal. In the waking world, things weren't much better. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, the lights in my apartment began to flicker. I tried to ignore it, blaming it on old wiring, but then I heard it, a faint, wet sound, like dripping water. I turned off the stove and listened. The sound was coming from the hallway, but when I looked, there was nothing there. I turned back to the kitchen, but the dripping continued, louder this time. My eyes followed the sound, and that's when I saw it, a dark, wet trail leading from the hallway to my bedroom. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed the trail, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The trail stopped at my bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, my hand trembling. The room was empty, but the wet sound persisted, now coming from above me. I looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. There, on the ceiling, was a stain, a large, dark blotch spreading like ink in water. It was wet and pulsating, dripping down onto the floor. I stepped back, horrified, as the stain slowly morphed into a face. My friend's face. His eyes stared down at me, hollow and accusing, his mouth twisted into a grimace. I ran out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My heart was racing, and my legs ached so much I could barely stand. I grabbed my phone and called Jenny, desperate for some sort of comfort. But when she picked up, her voice was distant, almost robotic. "Hello," she said, but it didn't sound like her. It was as if someone else was using her voice, someone empty and soulless. "Jenny, it's me. Something's wrong," I stammered, still panting from the fear. But there was no response, just a faint static buzzing in my ear. Then, I heard it, a soft, barely audible whisper. "You forgot the letter." My blood ran cold. I hung up and threw the phone onto the couch, backing away as if it were cursed. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the stain, the dripping water, the hollow eyes that haunted me. I felt like I was losing my mind, trapped between two worlds, one of the living and one of the dead. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I went back to Dr. Lang, practically begging him to help me end this nightmare. He listened calmly, nodding as I described the things I had seen, the things I couldn't unsee. His expression was grave as he guided me into another session. This time, as I drifted back into the trance, the images came faster. I was back on the pier, but everything felt sharper, more vivid. The fog was thicker, the air colder, and my friend was there, waiting for me, his face twisted in pain. I saw myself as that man again, clutching the crumpled letter that I had failed to deliver. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of my guilt. "I didn't mean to forget." My friend's figure loomed closer, his eyes filled with tears. "I trusted you," he said, his voice echoing like a mournful wind. "And you let me die without saying goodbye." I watched as his body began to disintegrate, turning to water and blood, seeping into the pier. The fog swallowed him, leaving me alone with my shame. Dr. Lang's voice echoed in the background, urging me to seek forgiveness, to make amends. In the depths of my mind, I saw myself kneeling on the pier, writing the letter that I had failed to deliver. I imagined giving it to his grieving parents, imagined the relief on their faces as they read their son's final words. I begged my friend's spirit to forgive me, to release me from the curse of this broken promise. Slowly, the fog began to lift, the water receded, and the pier became solid again. My friend's face softened, his eyes no longer filled with anger. He nodded, just once, and then he was gone. When I woke from the trance, I felt different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my soul. For the first time in years, my legs didn't hurt. The pain that had plagued me for so long was gone, and I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in decades. But there was one last thing to do. I went back to my apartment, determined to face whatever was left of the haunting. I opened the bedroom door, half expecting to see the stain still on the ceiling. But it was gone. The room was clean, empty, and the air felt fresh and light. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring up at the blank ceiling, feeling a strange sense of closure. The nightmares stopped after that, and the flickering lights no longer bothered me. My apartment was just an apartment again, not a gateway to the past. I couldn't explain what had happened, but I knew that I had finally been forgiven. The pain was gone, and with it, the ghost of my broken promise. Life slowly returned to normal, but I would never forget the lessons of that haunting, how the past has a way of reaching into the present, pulling us back into the darkness if we let it. And sometimes, the only way out is to confront the ghosts we've created. Thank you for joining me on this unsettling journey. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced something that felt like it was more than just coincidence? Or maybe a past life peeking through? I'd love to hear your stories. Stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't what we see in the dark, but what we carry within us. Until next time, sweet dreams, if you can.